Hello, welcome back to another gait analysis with me, your host, Monica Volkmar. And I have to admit something with this video is this is my second time trying to record this. First time I was in a room with terrible sound quality and it came out all garbled, and I was really excited to share it. And then I listened back to it and it was just shite. So I have to admit, this is my second time. I waited a little while to see if I could forget anything that I saw from the first time, because remember, the game I'm playing is that I'm doing this having not premeditated anything, not planned anything that I'm going to say, just seeing it for the first time like you are. Except this time that's not the case. So I feel like a bit of a cheater, but I've done my best to wipe my memory banks clean. So I'm going to be honest when I say that I'm remembering this from last time, or if I'm extrapolating on something that is making a bit more sense the second time I'm seeing it. Yeah, just so I'm upfront with you, I'm not trying to pretend or anything. On that note, let's meet Cary. Cary has a number of complaints that maybe I'll just list off first, and then we'll look at his static posture before we get into looking at his gait. Actually, you know what? Let's look at his posture first, then I'll name some things and then we'll watch his gait. Okay, so just some standout things we want to take note of. First thing that stands out, and I just got to say, I'm actually kind of impressed that I forget a lot of things about you, Cary. This is great. Way to go, memory. Or maybe way to not go, memory. Either way you look at it. So looking at his body, the first thing that jumps out at me is his right foot and lower leg. I'd like you to observe how the angle of his right tibia, his lower leg bone, looks to be bowed out to the side. So in anatomy speak, we call that a varus angle. Valgus being if his knee was tipped inwards towards his big toe, and varus angle being his leg tipped out towards his pinky toe. And we can see that creating a bowing of his Achilles tendon, but it doesn't look like the bowing is coming from his actual heel bone tipping inwards into an E version. It looks like the bowing is more related to the tibia in that varus position. If you look at his left calcaneus, his heel bone, it looks to be more everted, more rolled in on his left side, and more neutral on the right side. So that's very interesting. We can also see more toes sticking out on the right side of his right foot, indicating to us a little bit of a turned out something, turned out foot, turned out ankle, or maybe turned out all the way from his tibia. Although I kind of would not guess it's coming from his tibia, because usually a bowed out leg like that would have a more internally rotated tibia. But no rules about the ways the body can adapt over time, so we'll see. Now, we generally see with a more bowed out tibia like that, more of an externally rotated leg and more of an extended knee. And we can't really see super clearly from this angle, but it kind of does look like his right knee is more extended. So we'll double check that. And with a a turned out foot on the right, we can start to make assumptions. Oh, no, not assumptions. Let's not make assumptions. We can maybe infer or decide to more investigate into whether his foot can pronate or supinate. The turnout of the foot is often a strategy the body uses when it can't open the medial border of the foot sufficiently, which should happen in pronation. So then the body needs to find a strategy to open the medial border of the foot, all the joints on that side. So it will turn out the foot in an attempt to find more opening on the medial border. So we need to check if that foot is pronating and supinating. Now, if we just zoom out a little bit, the next thing that stands out to me is his shoulder girdle, rib cage. And it looks like he's a bit shifted with his rib cage towards his left side. I'm not sure if his pelvis is sitting right between his 2 feet, but I do have the sense that his rib cage is not centered between his 2 feet, that it's sitting more to the left. With a left foot that's more everted through that calcaneus, we could predict that his pelvis might be getting pushed to the right. One thing you can try and stand up and do if you haven't tried this yet is roll to the inside of your left foot and feel which way it pushes your pelvis, right or left. And what you should note is that when your foot everts like that, it should push your pelvis away from it to the right. So we maybe are seeing a body that is pelvis is being pushed away from his left foot, and his rib cage is balancing that out by being more shifted to the left. But we don't really know cause and effect. We're just really looking at a very superficial structural level. What is, not why is it like that just yet. Looking at his arms from this back view, I have this sense of his right arm being more internally rotated. You can see more of his palm facing us. That's interesting because we see more of his forearm internally rotated, but it almost looks like at his upper arm in the humerus, it's not internally rotating, but it does look like his left humerus is internally rotating. And that's interesting. It could also be something else that I'm seeing there. So let's park that thought and end this back view, noting that his right shoulder looks a bit lower and a little bit more protracted, potentially. Let's look at, front view. Yeah, so that right hand is more internally rotated here. We can see about 5 of his fingers more clearly than we can see his 5 fingers on his left hand. But do you see more of his bicep facing us on the right? If you look at the peak of his right bicep, it's pointing more forwards, which is indicating more of an externally rotated humerus. And his left bicep is pointing more in towards his side, so it's a more internally rotated humerus. But yet we see more of that right hand facing back, even though his right arm humerus is more externally rotated. So I think what we're seeing there is an internal rotation at the elbow. Any history on that elbow? That left arm just looks like maybe, could be on the left arm too. You're gonna have to clarify that with us, Cary. That's my first question. Something's wonky with your elbows and your arms. Please enlighten us. Now let's just move along because I tend to get fixated myopically on things, and I'm trying not to do that. We can see that bowed out position of his leg on the right side again. And it looks like his right knee is more internally rotated, and even like his kneecap is tilting inwards. I don't know if that's more of a, yeah, it's probably an internal rotation through his leg. It's hard for me to tell if his pelvis is rotated one way or the other. It's always a challenge with this frontal view. One thing I'm curious about when I see a bowed out just one leg like that, is there an injury in that ankle or knee or something on that right leg? Or is that a mass management strategy? Like if his pelvis, for whatever reason, doesn't want to move over on top of that right foot, he might, or his body, it's not a conscious thing, but his body might have found a way of getting some more mass over the right foot. And that can sometimes be a pushed out leg, like we're seeing there. And I can recognize that because that's what my body's doing in some way, shape, or form. I'm with you in that right tibia varus club, Cary. Let's just move along a little bit. But yes, actually, we can see, you see those creases in the right shoulder, the front of his shirt there? Looks a bit more like those creases indicating a closing down of that spot, like a protraction of the shoulder, which again is really bizarre. Because with that externally rotated humerus, you'd expect to see a more retracted scapula, but his is looking to be protracted. It does from this back view as well, unless I'm seeing something completely different. Side view. What I'm loving actually is that I'm seeing a lot of different stuff my second time through. So maybe that just speaks to a nice thing to do for anybody who practices gait analysis or postural analysis like this. Maybe wait a day and look at it again and see what new jumps out at you. But I am remembering this lovely neck extension. Do you see how right around the area of his Adam's apple, there's a beautiful extension, and I'm super jealous because my neck does not extend. Thank you, ballet. I'm looking at his knees. Knees are of interest. So do you see this left, this is the right side view. You can see a little bit of his left calf poking out behind his right calf, which is kind of telling me that his right knee is more pushed forward, more bent. So we can see the left knee behind it. And from the left side view, you can't see the back of his right calf sticking out behind it. So we're seeing a bit of a knee flexion on the right. And now the alarm bells are ringing because when you have a varus knee like that, a varus tibia, that should extend the knee, but his is bent. And hey, that's what mine's doing too. We're 2 for 2, Cary. Varus tibia with a knee flexion anomaly. So there could be some discomfort there. When there are two mechanics that really should not efficiently go together for gait, then there's a suspicion of something's up. But he hasn't listed his knees and his things that are bothering him, so nothing in his lower body he has mentioned, except for actually his left hip says it snaps, like the psoas tendon snaps when he extends it. So that's interesting. Maybe we'll see that show up in motion. I'm looking at his arms now, just because there was something curious about his arms. So again, we can see his left arm, the humerus is a little more internally rotated. And on the right, you can see that, however, from this view here, it looks like his elbow is more pointing to the side towards 3 o'clock. And here his elbow is pointing a little bit more backwards towards like 8 o'clock. So we are seeing, I think, on the right side, a bit of an internal rotation in the forearm, elbow, and on the left, a bit of an external rotation. Curious to see and try to remember how this all plays out in his movement. So let's take a look now at his gait cycle. First time through, we're going to watch full speed to see what jumps out at us, knowing that it's really tough to catch things that are happening full speed because literally every joint moves in less than a second. And not at end range. So it's not like we're looking at big, juicy motions. We're looking at subtlety. Right away, what's standing out to me, and I remember this now, but I've forgotten about it, but there's a lot of hiking in his pelvis. You see a lot of frontal plane hiking up and down, more so than anything. Very wiggly pelvis. Hey, that's like me too. I remember getting an analysis done once, and that being the standout thing on the video is, wow, my pelvis hikes, but that's about it. Okay, maybe we can look at his arms since those were interesting. Anything that we're seeing with his arms? Well, something I think I'm seeing. Oh, let's back him up. I want to watch that again. Oh, there's some standing. Okay. Here we go. Just looking at which way his pelvis rotates. I feel like it's only rotating one direction, not the other. It looks like left rotation only in the pelvis. Let's see. Left, center, left, center, left, center. Yeah, I think we have a case of a pelvis that can't rotate right, but we'll have to slow that down for me to be sure about it. And I actually completely forget, so this is awesome. I'm so happy how forgetful I am at this point. I also do see this when he's stepping onto his right leg, that right shoulder goes lower, so he's doing a lateral flexion, right, 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 but he never laterally flexes his spine to the left. Okay, so a couple of things there. Pelvis hiking, maybe only rotating to the left. Spine only laterally flexing to the right. So right away, that's kind of pointing to a gait phase that we can check out. Not to give it away, but let's break it down phase by phase. And remember, we're just looking at what I can see anyway. You'll probably see some different stuff than me. All right, so that's a little too crossed over for us to see anything. So let's see if it takes another step that is less crossed over. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So we're looking at what we can see, and this is not telling us why that we're seeing what we're seeing, but we got to start at the surface. So I'm putting him in a right heel strike. And we're looking for anything that's awry. Now, how is the quality of his heel strike? We want him to be striking on the lateral calcaneus. And I'm seeing a lot of toes out to the side. So he's holding that externally rotated tibia into his heel strike, which looks like it's limiting how well he's able to dorsiflex through his ankle, through the TCJ. Notice that lovely varus angle in the tibia. And as a general intention of this heel strike, can you hear those dogs barking in the background? Anyway, lost my train of thought. Oh yes, intention of the heel strike is we want to see the pelvis shifting to the left here. Sorry, to the right. Oh my goodness. Shifting to the right, the pelvis is what we want to see, which would give us an adduction in his right hip. However, we're seeing that his pelvis is kind of hiked on the left, and I don't know if it's shifting to the right. So a hike on the left will give us an adduction in the left hip. But what we want is not that. We want an abduction, meaning pelvis leaving away that leg. So we want to just keep that in the back of our minds that we might be seeing a left hip that doesn't abduct and a right hip that doesn't adduct, which might be consistent with this tibial bow out. But we need to compare with the other side as always. So before going into more detail, let's roll Cary into a pronated foot. So the right foot now is pronating, and our pronation phase is when we see all the toes have landed on the floor. And it looks like there on the front foot, all the toes are on the ground. And I know it's tough to see in this video, especially from behind, so we're gonna go from a front view next. So this is our timing of the phase when the front foot hits the ground. What we'd like to see is a contact with the first metatarsal and the fifth metatarsal still on the floor. I don't know if that's really happening. So we're not seeing a good supination of this foot, and nor are we seeing the supination from the foot carry up into this leg. And that's indicated by this knee that's bent. And if a knee is bent, we can almost predict that this hip will still be flexed. And at this moment in time, with a supinated leg, we want to see an extended knee and an extended hip and a supinated foot. And the intention of that supinated leg is to create a structure that the pelvis can shift away from. Don't know if we're seeing that. We are seeing a lateral flexion of the spine to the right. And we are seeing a nice hike in his pelvis on the right. Those are good. Good things to see, but we still have to compare it to his other side. Now I am seeing here a rotation to the left of his pelvis, which again is part of what we want here in the loading, aka suspension phase. But to know if it's the right amount and if it's appropriately timed, we need to look at the other side. So let's continue him on into his, oh yeah, now it's coming back to me, that right foot. So his mid stance. So as we go from suspension into mid stance or transition phase, with his feet side by side, we want to see his body neutral, everything level. And as we get into this phase here, what stands out to me this time and stood out to me last time is if we look at his foot, it should be supinating, but do you see what it does there as his legs passes through? Swivel. It's like Pulp Fiction. You've seen that movie where John Travolta and Uma Thurman are dancing. They're doing the twist. That's what he's doing there. So we're seeing his heel lift up a little too soon. When his feet are side by side like that, we don't want to see the heel. We don't want to see the heel lifting up that quickly. We'd like to see his foot pronating. I mean, supinating. Wow. Deal with my brain right now. It's 6 p.m. And that's about the time I start to get sleepy. Anyway, lost my train of thought. I was just thinking about how many hours I've been awake at this point. I've been awake for 14 hours. How many hours has it been since my last coffee? Focus. Okay, back to gait. Apologies. So his right foot is not supinating. Instead, it's swiveling out, which is indicating that somewhere along this right leg, we're seeing a breakdown in transverse plane in his rotation. And we might see that this ankle actually is having trouble externally rotating, especially with that foot pointed out. That's pretty common. So, question, right subtalar joint external rotation. Injury right ankle. Okay, so we also are seeing still this quite hiked on the right. Oh my God. Gonna get my left and rights down. And we're seeing this kind of a lateral flexion to the right through his spine. So he's still holding the shape of his body that he had in his right loading phase, and that should now be level, and it's not. So he's not supinating on his right side at all. Let's scroll along. So now, after we see his foot do that spin on the floor, we're getting him into a left heel strike, which is obscured. So we're not going to say too much about that. I'm going to guess. We'll see from the front view better. I'll check it out then, but we can kind of guess right around there is where we're seeing his left heel hit the ground. His right foot's a little obscured there as well. It's kind of a weird angle. But it looks to be that he has more contact with his right foot on the ground when it's behind him. Even in spite of it not really seeming like it supinates, well, it does stay on the ground. And his knee extends better, which is interesting because in his resting stance, his right knee was more bent. So that's always interesting. So that makes me wonder about what he said about his left hip snapping. It looks like we might have a case where he does have a bit more of a flexed left hip, which will shorten through that psoas area. So when he extends his leg, he might be bumping into that. And let's watch if his pelvis shifts over to his left leg. Because if you remember when he was swinging through his right leg, his pelvis is kind of dropped on the right, hiked on the left. And what we want to see is more of a level pelvis that's shifting to the side. And it's kind of a similar situation, although a little more level. So it might be indicating he's just a little more comfortable getting his left leg forward. And he might be having some trouble show up when his right leg has to go forward. And that's the case with some folks. Is really generally, we can say things like all of his left leg forward phases of gait might be a little more effortless and easy. So his problems might not be showing up there, but when he gets his right leg forward, that's where we start to see things break down, generally speaking. But I'm really curious about this leg now because it's not doing what I expected it to do. I was not expecting his knee to actually extend like that. Interestingly as well, I just want to watch his arms because something just kind of stood out to me. So swinging the right leg forward, just watch his arms swinging. In theory, right about here is where we'll see his left arm swinging forward towards its end range and the right leg swinging backwards towards its end range. And then right about here is where we're going to see his left arm swinging back to its end range and the right arm swinging forwards to its end range. So does it look like there's anything different about those? kind of looks different in his elbows. Yeah. So when it looks like here is with his left arm swinging forward, and this is just what I'm dialing in on. I don't know if this is relevant. That was a hard word to get out of my mouth. Relevant. But with his right leg swinging forward into strike, look at his left elbow and the degree of bend it's going in. And then compare that to the amount of bend his right elbow does. It's a lot more bent on the right. I don't know if that's anything relevant to Cary's situation at all. Just fixated on his elbows now. I should probably move along. But it does look like this right elbow as well. It doesn't extend as much here. That was the arm. Yeah, that was the arm where his forearm was more externally rotated. So it's not going to be able to extend and internally rotate behind him like it needs to here. But it does flex. And look at the extension in this elbow. It goes. Look at that. And in his history, actually, not his history, but in his complaints, he's saying that his left bicep sometimes gets this nervy feeling in it. So nervy sensations can be either tension down a nerve, something's getting stretched too long, or compression, stuff's just stuck. But what it looks like is there's a lot more extension in this elbow. And what will that do to the bicep in the sagittal plane? Extension of the elbow is going to eccentrically load his left bicep. Whoopsie. There. So he might be experiencing with each arm swing back on the left. Just watch it again. Watch the elbow just extends locked out. But on this side, when his right leg goes forward, right arm back, you don't get that same look of his elbow being as locked out, like it's not flinging back behind him. But when his left leg swings forward, left leg forward, left arm back, that elbow goes into a much more locked out position. So I wonder if that's where that bicep nervy sensation lies, just in too much extension on that elbow. Doesn't tell us why he's doing that, but it's interesting. So could it be that, sometimes you can see strategies where, it's might be a bit of a challenge for whatever reason to get onto that left leg. So what else is happening at the moment in time that could help him? Well, just to fling that arm back a little bit more might just help him get there. And the fact that he's crossing his left foot over a lot, don't know what that means yet. Does he do that on his next step as well? Yeah, he does cross over that left foot quite a bit. So let's get him from a front view where we can see a little more clearly him coming into a left heel strike. And it's a little unclear, a little bit blurry, but this is life. I think it's kind of fun when you have blurry images because you really have to use your brain to fill in the gaps. Yeah, I just think it's fun. So I'm going to say left heel strike is right around here. Look how bent his right knee is. This is an interesting view. Let's compare that to his right heel strike. Huh. Look how straight his right knee, his left knee is. Very different from his left heel strike. So we are seeing what I suspected was a right knee that wouldn't be able to extend. It's just showing up specifically here. When he's in a left heel strike, we do want to see his right knee extending more than that. And it does really look like he's hanging out, mostly weight bearing in that right foot when his weight should be shifting to the left. So even though it looked like his pelvis wasn't shifting to the right, I actually think that he's not as good at shifting his pelvis to the left. And could that be why he's hanging out more into this right? He's hanging out more and longer on this right knee, not getting his pelvis over there. And could that be contributing to this moment here with the knee flexed and his weight still in it? It's going to unlock the knee joint in the transverse plane, making it available to be more adaptable and mobile. And in that state, we could be seeing how that would make this knee susceptible to a frontal plane deviation. When the knee is bent, it's just more movable. When it's straight, like this one is, it's going to be more locked and rigid to adaptation. But this right knee, how long has that been going on for? And over time, could that be giving us that varus angle? Questions. Does this knee feel weird? And has anything happened to your left leg? And if you look at that right heel strike, yeah, that right heel strike ain't so good though. If you look at the dorsiflexion in the ankle, he's really landing almost on the side of his foot. There's very little clean dorsiflexion in that ankle, which would be hard with a tibia like that. A tibia that's bowed out is going to block the talocrural joint from dorsiflexing cleanly. We need eversion, dorsiflex, eversion in the calcaneus, and you could call it eversion in the tibia, I guess, if you wanted to. Whereas on this side, we are seeing a little bit better dorsiflexion. Just looking at the way his pelvis is hiking as he steps onto it. So here we can pretty clearly see, yeah, his tendency to only rotate his pelvis to the left. So let's take a look at here. Right heel strike, pelvis is rotating left. You can see that with the direction his button on his pants is pointing. But as he swings his left leg through, we want to see a right rotation, but he doesn't really rotate right, staying pretty straight forwards. So if we have a situation where we have his left leg coming forward, oh yeah, and especially here when his foot's pronating, that's where we really want to see that pronating foot rotating his pelvis away from it to the right. But instead we see a pretty big hike and zero rotation. So if we have a hike, no rotation, and he's weight bearing on that leg, we're going to see a bit of compression. That's left hip. right, which is I. So a bit of a left hip compression because that hike on the left is going to contribute to adducting his left hip. The lack of rotation to the right is going to internally rotate his right hip, and those two joint motions are associated with compression of the hip. And what we were seeing when he was landing his right foot into pronation was that his left hip and knee were staying flexed. Which again, this flexion of the left hip, that's another mechanism of compression of that hip joint at the front. So again, that could be what the left psoas snappy sensation is there. So interestingly, oh, that word was hard. Interestingly, we have two knees that stay bent when they should straighten. His left knee is bending here when his right foot is pronating. And we can see that a bit more clearly from the front when his toes of his right foot actually land on the ground. Right there. So yeah, that's a very flexed hip when it should be extended with this foot still touching the floor. Yowza. A big rotation to the left with his pelvis. But with his right knee situation, what we see is that it stays bent here while his left heel is striking, but it does, oh, maybe it doesn't straighten as easily either. Well, his left foot pronates a little more quickly. His toes get down on the ground faster. So yeah, this left knee is still quite bent. I mean, right knee. Let's just compare that. Yeah. Both hips are struggling to extend a little bit. This one's staying a little more extended throughout the heel strike of his right foot. This side's quite a bit bent, and the heel strike continues to bend forward. So yeah, both knees need a little help extending. Both hips need a little help extending, but in particular, his left hip seems to be holding a bit more of a compressed state where it's hiked, flexed, internally rotated. Sorry, I should have said hip is adducted, not hiked. Pelvis is hiked, the hip is adducted. Okay. Now, one of his other complaints are that his left paraspinals complain at him. And if we have a pelvis that's only rotating to the left, then we're going to have a spine that in theory is only rotating to the right. And so that right rotation of the spine, left rotation of the pelvis, what would that do to the state of the paraspinals? And there's some debate on what's happening at the state of the paraspinals in regards to whether they're lengthening or shortening. Some of them are lengthening, some of them are shortening, but I think we can simply say that if your spine is only rotating one direction and your pelvis only one direction, then you're probably going to notice a difference in the sensation of the right and left. And I don't want to just say that because I've heard so and such say that when the spine rotates to the right, the left side of the spine muscles will lengthen. I think that's generally going to be true. So we could say he's experiencing some length tension on the right side, rather left side of his back. Does it look like his spine is only rotating one direction? Pelvis left. What does his spine do? Does his spine rotate right? It side bends to the right. And it really only side bends to the right. It doesn't really get to the left. It's more straight. But when he puts his right foot forward, he side bends quite a bit. So to use a green line to show you, he might be having length getting pulled in the frontal plane through that left side of his spine. That might be that left paraspinal discomfort that he says he notices with deadlifting. So whenever he's asking these muscles to contract into an extension as he's deadlifting, or just hold his best neutral spine, this side's always going to be biased to being a bit longer, potentially in two planes of motion, frontal and transverse. So what do we want to do with him? Well, we want to ask him some questions, because this isn't about necessarily fixing his problems. We don't know what his problems are. We just can see what his structure is doing. So I would want to find him a place where he has, okay, I want to ask him about some clarifying questions about his right foot and knee. Like, is that a thing that you have any history around? Because it really stands out. I would want to see if we put that tibia more straight, what would that do to what it looks like and how he's able to get his pelvis onto his right leg? Because that big rotation away to the left, that tibia, and that foot, just looks to me like his mechanics aren't set up to happily weight bear onto the right leg. So we're seeing this side bend to the right in his spine. So I want to know, I'd be curious to see an assessment of your pelvis shifts right and left to see if there's a difference in how far you can go. I'd probably like to see some hiking assessments of your pelvis. And just the fact that your pelvis is way better at hiking up and down at anything than anything else, really, I'd want to see some sagittal plane evaluation of your pelvis. Can you anterior tilt? Can you posterior tilt? Can your spine flex and extend? Because sometimes if you buy up all the movement in one plane, then there's nothing left for another. So for example, if we have a lack of ability in the sagittal plane for his pelvis to do an anterior tilt and a posterior tilt, then we might see another plane of motion, like the frontal plane, have to pick up the slack a little bit, so to speak. I would also like to assess whether or not your left hip can extend. Uh-oh, come on, thingy. Left hip, can it extend? Can it abduct? Can it externally rotate? It looks like it stays flexed, adducted, and internally rotated throughout his cycle. I'm also curious about this elbow. Why is that elbow extending so much? There are some things that I'm not able to really see clearly through the spine and the rotations of it. I am questioning how well his spine rotates. And I wonder if that's why we're seeing this difference in his arm swinging. So I would want to ask Cary, rotation of your spine. Can you do it? And is it different right and left? Has there ever been some kind of accident with either of your shoulders or elbows? I know he mentioned in his notes that his Doing motions overhead can aggravate his left shoulder a little bit. I feel like there's something I'm not seeing here. Something I am missing. So I think I'm going to stop talking now because I've been going on for a while. So at this point, I invite you to chime in the comments on YouTube if you're watching this and are seeing stuff that you'd like to say out loud. It helps us all to learn when you pop in with your own perspective and observations, because like I said, some stuff I just don't see, but other people stands out like a sore thumb. And that's so cool, because then when we all share our perspective, we all get to see something new, and that helps us all to become better at watching people walk, which is super fun. And that's what we're here to do. Okay, so on that note, maybe Cary, you can fill us in on what is your history, answer some of those questions, tell us what's going on. Hopefully this was useful, and tune back in another time for a new video.